There are 7 different ways that psychologists measures learning of individuals' behavior. The first one being errors. Psychologists measure learning by tracking the reduction in errors over time. For example, in a study on language acquisition, researchers note how many grammatical errors a participant makes in spoken sentences before and after a learning intervention. 2. Retrieval practice. A psychologist might use a memory recall test as a measure for learning. For instance, after studying a list of vocabulary words, participants are asked to recall and write down as many words as they can remember to assess their learning progress. This would be another word for retrieval practice, will also be memory test. Number 3, observation. Observing changes in behavior can be a powerful measure of learning. In a study on learning new motor skills, psychologists would typically observe how a participant's movement becomes more fluid and efficient with practice. Surveys and questionnaires. Psychologists may use surveys to assess learning outcomes. For example, after a training program on stress management, participants complete a survey rating their confidence in using the techniques learned as a measure of their learning. Number 5, performance assessments. A psychologist might use a practical task to measure learning. In a study on a problem-solving skills, participants are asked to solve increasingly complex puzzles, with their performance serving as a measure of learning and skill development. Number 6, neuroimaging. Psychologists can measure learning by examining changes in brain activity using neuroimaging techniques. For example, a study on music training may use fMRI scans to show how the brain's response to musical stimuli changes with learning. And lastly, longitudinal studies. Tracking learning progress over time is crucial for psychologists. In a longitudinal study on education interventions, the researchers follow a group of students from kindergarten on to high school, measuring academic performance at different stages to evaluate the long-term impact of the intervention on learning outcomes. Next, according to the textbook, a cumulative record is a tool used in behavioral psychology to track an individual's learning progress over time. It is a graphical representation of an individual's performance on a task, showing a continuous record of their responses and the consequences that follow those responses. Here are ways a chemical record can be used to measure learning. Recording responses. The cumulative record starts with recording each response the individual makes during learning a task. This could be correct responses, errors, or any other behavior of interest. Plotting responses. Each response is plotted on a cumulative record chart over time. This helps visualize the pattern of responses and how they change as learning progresses. Analyzing trends. By analyzing the cumulative record, psychologists can identify trends in the individual's learning. They can see if performance is improving, deteriorating, or plateauing over time. Measuring progress. The slope of the cumulative record line can indicate the rate of learning. A steeper slope suggests faster learning, rather than a flatter slope suggests slower progress. Identifying learning plateaus. Plateaus in the cumulative record can reveal when learning has reached a temporary standstill. This can help psychologists make adjustments to the learning environment or teaching methods to help the individual overcome obstacles. And lastly, assessing reinforcement effects. The consequences following each response, such as rewards or feedback, are also recorded on the cumulative record. This allows psychologists to assess how reinforcement influences learning and behavior. Overall, a cumulative record provides a visual and quantitative way to measure learning progress, track changes over time, and evaluate the effectiveness of learning interventions. And the source I used was the textbook.